Hello and welcome to the first episode of Dice and Design. It's a new show that I'm putting together with my co-host Tyler from the channel Flame Zombie. Say hi, Tyler.
Hey, if you don't know my channel, that's unsurprising. It's pretty small. I just started making videos regularly a few months ago or so. I talk about RPGs and historical European martial arts and that sort of intersection. So yeah.
Yeah, I like Tyler's channel. I thought he brought an interesting perspective to when he talked about in the way he talked about the game. So I decided to invite him to co-host a show with me. And it's a show that we want to do, like talking about, like trying to do a little bit of a deeper dive into different mechanics of RPGs. So we see a lot of conversation about like the surface stuff. We're gonna try to maybe overanalyze, maybe go a little too artistic in the detail, but hopefully it's gonna be a good fun. And today, for this first episode, the subject that we picked was critical hits and critical fumble. Tyler, the game you mostly play, from what I understand, is Pathfinder, the first edition. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'd be right. And crits in that game are interesting. There you can tell Paizo's handled critical hits in a few different ways in that series. Where, well, for those who don't know, Pathfinder First Edition is basically a modified version of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. And crit builds were really strong in you're not the first person to have said that, whoever said that.
Tyler is not the
Chris,
same as Bob the World Builder.
I talk about more than one thing, and I don't talk about 5e ever. But yeah, crits were really strong in 3.5 because of the crit range mechanic, which maybe I'll go into detail in a bit. So they added crit confirmation, which is a balancing mechanic, but it's kind of a weird flavored thing. Like, what exactly does that mean? And they made it so that a critical hit is not necessarily an automatic hit unless it is a natural 20. So there's a bunch of like qualifying statements, and it's one of the places where I'm not a fan of it because you can tell that they're trying to like do a patch job over the failings of earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons. And then in second edition Pathfinder, one of the few things I like about that system, they actually go back and fix the crit system by basically making it a degrees of success thing where if you get 10 over whatever you're trying to do, so if it's the armor class, if it's the DC of the skill, that's what a crit is. And I think that's a great way to do it because it means that there are certain things that are just physically impossible for you to achieve, right? Um, Likewise, I have mixed feelings on crit fumbles in D20 systems in general because it's just that one's much simpler in Pathfinder First Edition. It's just a one is always an automatic failure. But that's weird, someone who has literally no skill, a zero or even a minus in something, they have just as high a chance to automatically fail as someone who is a professional that's been doing this job for 20 years. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So yeah.
Yep. Because, like, if I remember correctly from my time, like, there was a long time that I do touch Pathfinder, but I'm familiar with what they do with for crit. But in the first edition of Pathfinder, once you roll a 20, you had to confirm the crit by rolling a d20 again. And if it was a 20 again, then it would be a crit success. Is that correct?
If it's a hit again.
Or
So
if it's
if
a
you
hit,
roll
hit,
an
hit
nat,
again,
yeah,
yeah.
if you roll a natural 20 and you roll again with all the same bonuses, and that would have hit the DC or the armor class or whatever. Well, actually, just the armor class because you just have to confirm crits to hit something. You don't
Mhm.
have to confirm crits on like skill checks again. So that's another bit of like annoying granularity that doesn't help the game at all. It just kind of is another thing you have to remember. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Because, like you said, I always found that this was clunky, and I understand why they did it. Because, like,
Yeah.
a 20 on a 20-sided dice is going to be 5% of the time, and that's what they do in Dungeon and Dragon 5th edition, and that's what I've been done for most of the story of Dungeon and Dragon. You roll a 20, crit oftentimes were like an optional rule or a home
Mm.
rule. Now it has been included, and again, even in D&D Fifth Edition, crits are only in combat. You don't have like crit on skill check, um, but it's on a 20 on a D20. That's 5% of the time. So I feel like that the people at Pathfinder felt that this was too much of a too high of a probability and wanted to figure out a way to reduce it. So the crit confirmation was born.
Mm.
But yeah, like you said, you always like felt very clunky. And then I guess if since you don't have to roll a 20 twice, but you do have to confirm your hit, that it really makes it like you have like 5% chance to hit, and then you confirming it's still based again on the skill of your character. So what if hitting a creature was easy for you, you have more chance to confirm your crit.
Mm-hmm.
Then if you're fighting something difficult, the crit become more difficult. So maybe there's something interesting there. Like at some point, like it doesn't become independent of your skill or of the target that you're fighting.
Yeah, I do like what it represents in the world after you've thought about it for a second, because at first it feels very gamey, like it's like, oh, they're just using this because 3.5 added the weapons that, crit on a 19 or an 18 or even lower, and then that creates issues, right? Where if you don't have the confirmation and someone's just, doing double, triple or more damage all the time, that that the D20 already has balance issues. That's not what this stream is about, but it makes those issues really obvious. Uh, but yeah, you look at it and it's like, okay, well, it does have some merits as long as you understand it. But it Pathfinder has a lot of those annoying little things that are going to make your first few sessions with the system just obnoxious, because you're like, oh, you got a crit. Okay. Oh, wait, what do we do now? Yeah.
Yep, it add extra step, and
Mm.
it like I understand like yeah maybe 5% is too much, but I think the confirmation does slow down the process for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And it's always a question of trade-off when you do a game design
Mm.
in a way that in a sense that is having something that is a little more uh, simulationist, a little more realistic in a way, worth the extra hassle of having an extra dice roll. I guess some people would put that line at different place.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I found and this is something where we might talk about later as well. But like when because on Pathfinder when you roll, it's only like you double or triple your damage, right?
Mm.
When you confirm a crit. When you do a fumble or a crit like on a 1, there's no confirmation there. It's just a miss. So you always have this 5% chance of missing, no matter your skill level, no matter what
Mm.
you're attacking. But there's no, because like Elle say here, failure is always an option, and I think that's should be in the game. Like no, even if you're very good at something, sometimes maybe your head
Mm.
is not into it, and especially when you're opposing somebody else that you don't know what they're gonna do,
Mm.
there should always be this chance of failure.
Mm.
What I have a problem with is when people introduce the notion of oh you damage yourself, or oh you drop your sword, or oh you fall on your ass or whatever, like those fumble, really like just not being a miss, but it's a miss and actually something bad happened to you.
Mm.
I always found that on a 5% was quite high, and
Mm.
I know people like that, but keeping it as a miss I think is fair. Making it like something negative that happened to you, different story. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's like I think it's why I'm really attracted to the idea of degrees of success, where I think something that Pathfinder Second Edition kind of misses is that you should also have the inverse, right? Where you should only critically fail or fumble if you get below 10 at something. So, okay, you've missed it, but you've only missed it by, 2 or
Mhm.
3. That's just you failed. But if you missed it by 10, that's when you're starting to like shoot your friend, or, way overswing, throw your rotator cuff out or something like that, because that sort of thing can happen. I've seen some really goofy injuries with
Yep.
people, injuring themselves, because if you're trying to, especially if you're trying to swing a sword and you're like swinging it way too hard and it doesn't hit what you're intending to hit, there's nothing to take up that the impact of that. It's just all into your shoulder now. So yeah.
Or even like sometimes like more serious injury when you're sword
Mm.
fighting, if especially you're fighting with one hand, you always
Mm.
have to mind the off hand. Like oftentimes you're gonna
Yeah.
see people like
Yeah.
keeping in the back or stuff like that because
Mm.
you have to be careful. Even your leg, you
Yeah.
don't want to hit your own leg, stuff like that.
Even in
Those kind of thing can happen, but
even
five
in
percent of the time,
Yeah, yeah, I know. But like even in cutting competitions, I think they make you stand with your dominant leg forward. They don't let you like step into it to generate
mhm,
it, even though that's like the best way to make it cut because it generates a lot of extra power. But they're just worried that as you make that step, you might rotate over wrong and end up hitting yourself in the knee or something. Because yeah, that is
mhm,
possible.
yeah. And of course, like when you're fighting like against an actual opponent, it multiply the level of complexity and
Mhm,
the possibility of accident. I'm sure you see that as well in sparring.
mhm,
Uh, and of course, then again, the skill. Like now, if we say that it's on a one, that's purely based on the die. The skill of the fighter has no impact on it. So again, there's a problem there.
mhm,
If we want to do like a confirmation thing, then again, we there's the slowdown that happen. So it's not an easy way. Like I can see the excitement, I can see the interest that it bring. There's something like just for the game aspect of thing. There's something fun. You see like people get excited when they roll at that
mhm,
20. You get people that get devastated when they roll a one. But when if you translate it to the in game, to the world, what those translate to, oftentimes it does make the game feel a bit goofy.
mhm.
Yeah. You were mentioning like the great success, yeah, that Pathfinder 2 does, and it's true. Like David Gual have something similar in Dungeon Delver, where the better you succeed, the more effect you're gonna have. So, and you say for a fumble, I would do that if you roll a nat one, make a check to see what the effect is, and if it's bad,
Modifier based on combat skills. Fighters are less likely to see anything bad. Yep. I think when Max gets back from being dead, we should talk about the like crit tables and fumble tables because they're sort of. Oh, yep. Thanks.
yep. Go ahead, continue.
Oh, I was just going to say because they're kind of related to adding some. What would you say? They can add some reality, but also disrupt game flow.
Mhm.
So there's good and bad to be had there.
Yeah, that's something like I agree with you on that. I've seen that a lot, like because like yeah, they can be funny. Oh, you do a crit, now maybe you do more damage, maybe not even, but maybe you have a chance to do a lingering injury or stuff like that.
Mhm.
Maybe same thing when it's a crit, it's a fumble on yourself. Maybe then on the table you have a range like David Gold was suggesting that your combat modifier is gonna keep you out of the very bad zone, but something bad can happen still. But I always found that those like it's like because in combat you always have like to roll to it, then roll to damage. There's all like that, and the more step we can reduce from that to keep the flow going, so it goes faster. Every time you have to roll on a chart, it's another roll, and then it's looking up the chart, and then it's like reading the chart. That I find that it's slowed down the process a lot.
Hmm.
I do agree that it can bring something to the game, but I'm not sure if the trade-off is worthwhile for me.
Hmm. I think if you're going to do crit charts, I stopped using them a while ago. I toyed around with them for a while. Hey Rick, um, hey Johnny. I toyed around with them for a while, but I generally agreed. I think if I was going to do them again, what I would do is I would pre-roll some fumbles or some successes on that chart just beforehand. And that way you don't have to roll and then look down the table and go, well, let's see. You already sort of know, it's still random, it's still exciting for all of your players, maybe it robs the GM of some, excitement, but it keeps the flow going.
So you will make like those roll beforehand, like have a
And then write down,
have a queue, like have a queue
yeah,
of the
mm,
oh, but
and
only
then
the
write
GM will
down,
know that.
yeah, and then write down, in your GM notes, the first time somebody fumbles this session, they get a 57 on the chart, and that's this. And then that way you just, you rattle it off real quick, and you keep things going while having that layer of complexity. Oh, I couldn't tell if he was dead or not. Hmm.
So if you if you pre-roll those results on the crit chart, and you do you feel like it take away the excitement of the player, like to, because there's always this moment of tension when you roll a chart of like you don't know what the result is.
Hmm.
Do you think it takes like, because now like we were talking about like the what the crit chart bring to the table, which is this excitement,
Hmm.
but now we kind of like taking it away by hiding it behind the GM screen, being pre-roll and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true. I think either way you do it, it should add depth, right? It shouldn't just be something to add layers of complexity, right? Complexity is a negative side effect of adding depth, right? You
Hmm.
you want to
Yep.
add depth, but you don't just want to add complexity. So if the results of the chart aren't interesting and they don't change the way that somebody ends up playing as a result of that, then that yeah, you shouldn't have it either way. But I think either way you handled it, you're adding depth. I think it depends on what sort of flavor of combat you're going for. Whereas if you do roll it and then look see what happened there, and you have that little pause, that suspenseful moment, it can sort of allude to those moments in fiction where almost Matrix like, where you see, like
Yep.
bullets moving in slow motion, or um where like someone fires a gun and then you don't see who got shot, so you're waiting to see like, oh, how bad was that, what
Or
happened.
even or even this
Mm,
tension when you see like a character get it, you like
mm,
sometimes the audience see the character got
mm,
his arm chopped off,
mm,
but there's a second of delay before the
mm.
actually guy that got his arm chopped off realize.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
that's also
Uh,
something like this. Like you say, like when you have when you add depth, you add complexity.
mm,
When you add tension, you do break the flow a bit,
mm.
because tension come with those pauses. Mm.
And on the other hand, if you do the pre-rolling and you're just, you have it right away, what's going to happen as the GM, uh that can be more of the shocking instant moments where like a character out of nowhere, you have like the shock deaths in, I don't know, The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones, that sort of thing, where they don't really add any tension to the scene. They don't pull their punches. It's just bam, this character just got shot out of nowhere. So I think it kind of depends on the flavor you want to go for. I do think the latter, maybe particularly because of those two series airing concurrently, that that for me wore itself out pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Just because both of those series lasted so long, and so it's like, okay, by the fifth character that you've killed in a shocking and sudden way, it's not shocking and sudden anymore.
Yeah, and that I think that is true as well for those critical chart. At some point, once you roll the same thing twice
Mm,
or thrice,
mm,
it kind of like, oh, okay, we saw that before. It kind of like loses yeah, kind of
mm,
moment. This gasping moment. I'd like to let's take a step back from the weed a bit,
mm,
and let's talk in a more in general term, or more in general like big picture idea about the
mm,
crits. Like, do we even need them? Do they like really bring something to the game? If we want to include critical hit, do we need to include critical fumble? Do they have to come in pair? Do they have to be like somewhat symmetrical? Do they like, and what about like system that don't use them all together? And what about system like somebody was mentioning in that our degree of success? Like somebody was saying in GURPS, like, every time that you 10 or more, well, that's kind of like a, it's not like it becomes more a degree of success. And the same thing with Pendragon, where you have like critical success, partial success, and just regular success. I should have said that in a better order, but so the idea of crits, and we know like that has been introduced like it wasn't like in the core book. It wasn't like a rule as written from the start. That's something that came later, became as a house rule, uh, then kind of included, now included in combat. Now people include it in even for skill, even though that's not in the rule book. And if we call about the current edition, and the same thing with critical miss or fumble, that's also usually a homebrew. So do the designer of the games know better, or do the player do the right thing by adding all those this volatility? Does it lead too much? Does it leave too much to chances? I know that's a lot of question,
Mm.
but I'll let you go wherever you want with that.
Yeah. I was just thinking immediately the cheap RPG designer answer is whatever your table thinks is fun is
Yeah,
what's right.
that's not the
But
correct answer.
yeah, let's get the
That's a
trigger
cop
bits in
out.
here. There's that brings up a good point though, because almost everybody does homebrew this. So it's something that is worth looking at, right? I think it's if most people are including it, why are they including it? Well, I think in 5e, because you mentioned the current edition, it's because that system isn't lethal enough. And if you include crit fails in addition to critical successes, you're more likely to have the combat not drag on for ages, with especially a 5% chance for it to happen. And stacking if you have disadvantage, because then it becomes like I'm an English major, so don't ask me to do math, but it's a higher than 5% chance. Um, uh, so that's one thing that does specifically with 5e, but that's a little narrow. I think Shadowrun is an interesting system. I think all of them are like this, but my experience is mostly with 5th edition Shadowrun, because they only have crit failures. I think that's the only system that I know of that does that, which is if you roll more than, it's a d6 dice pool for those of you that don't know. If you roll more
Mm.
ones than fives and sixes, then, or it's something like if more than half of your dice pool is ones, that's a critical glitch, and either some amount of magic or some element of chaos has just caused you to catastrophically fail at that roll. That way it's interesting because it scales to how big is your dice pool. If your dice pool is not that big, you're way more likely to totally screw something up, than if you have a huge dice pool. It's really unlikely that you're going to roll a ton of ones and like no fives or sixes.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting in that they didn't decide to do crits. But I'm using that comparison to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, because Shadowrun 5th edition is a very lethal system. If it had, if you get shot by a sniper rifle in Shadowrun, you're dead. Pretty much that's it, because the health doesn't really scale at all in that game. Pretty much the health that you start with in Shadowrun is your health for the rest of the game. You might get one or two more, and that's pretty much it.
But I think also like because you said in Dungeon Dragon 5th edition, the system is not lethal enough, but even the way that they did the critical damage is pretty weak because
Mm,
you double your dice. You don't even double
mm,
the bonus that you put to your dice. You're like if you add your
mm,
strength bonus stuff like that. And also it's not clear in the rules if do you roll the same number of dice but make time 2, or do you roll twice as many dice. And
mm.
most people, from what I've seen, will roll the same number of dice but double the result. Then you roll a 1. Well, congratulations, you did 2 damage plus your strength on your critical hit. I always
Yeah,
thought
and it's
that
like
was weak. Mm.
it,
And
it just takes the punch out of the excitement of a crit, right? Like
yeah,
what
exactly.
you
It
get
builds you
those, and
up
then
and
yeah.
then it lets you down.
And I hate those because as a GM, you're like, how am I supposed to narrate this in an exciting way?
Yeah.
You like chopped his pinky off. Like I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's why it's also it's usually something that I homebrew. But I wanted to talk about like the crit, like in those system compared to a system like Shadowrun, where because in Dungeon Dragon type game, which include Pathfinder in this case,
Mm,
you it you attack somebody targeting the AC, and the AC is static. So as soon as some point there's some enemies that will need you to have would need you to hit more than to roll more than 20 on your dice to hit them,
Hmm.
depending on the
Yeah.
character. So now at some point saying like, oh well, if you roll 20, it's always gonna be a hit. So you always have this 5% chance of at least touching the damaging the guy. So at that point, does that make, because of the static AC that you have to target against, does that make the critical hit mechanic necessary?
Mhm.
Because otherwise you would have like character pretty disengaged, and the critical miss in the same uptick, somebody could have like a big enough bonus that there would no chance that it would not hit you, but now there's at least always this 5% chance that it will miss. So when we start about when we have like this kind of mechanical system, if we were to cut those, then maybe we can have like this the player being disengaged because, well, there's nothing I can do. Or but if we rely on that instead of like changing the system completely, which you cannot do for a Dungeon and Dragon because it's too core to the experience. But
Mhm.
like if you don't have that, like if you rely on that, is it enough? Like, are the player be satisfied staying there, waiting for this 20
Mhm.
and rolling round after round and missing and missing? Like if we had like two characters with a lot of AC, but not very good at hitting, that combat would go nowhere. It was just like about like
Mhm.
waiting for people rolling those crits one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it's key on to your system for situations like that to have. So like one of the reasons I really like Pathfinder is you have to pick and choose what you're specialized at. If your AC is through the roof, it's very likely your will save isn't very high,
Mm-hmm.
right? Likewise, if your to hit is really high, you might not have the best saves, you might not have the best skills and things like that. So yeah, when you get into those slongs, it can. Well, I mean, there's the I think much better cop out answer of roleplay is always the answer. You know, I will if I have people that realize they can't hit this guy uh by the just mechanics of the game, I will always, um not then and there, but be maybe demonstrate if there's multiple combatants, demonstrate, oh, you've got this other guy using the Mordslag, he's trying to strike with the pommel of his sword to deal damage to this guy that he can't get through the armor. And of course, that's not as effective as if he just had the ability to outright hit his AC. But I will give them a bonus to hit if the combat's just absolutely going nowhere, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you run into that like nightmare situation where you didn't intend for it to be like a long endurance fight and it is just, oh god, none of these people can hit each other, and that's not what I wanted here. Because I think you have like in the Norse sagas, I can't remember the names, but the two shield masters
Yep.
that fought each other for like 7 days and 7 nights and didn't land a single blow on the other one. And so if that's what you want to evoke, then maybe it's good that you have almost zero chance to hit. And if you're in like that crazy fantasy context where it's like, okay, you're not worried now about hitting the other guy, you're worried about freezing to death, eating, can you outlast this other guy long enough, yeah.
But this mean like at the like around the table, then around the table, that would be pretty boring. And at some point, maybe that would be like the. I think that's something that in a situation that should be solved otherwise. Maybe if you both acknowledge, okay, I'm only gonna hit you if I roll a 20. Don't just sit there round after round rolling 20. Like resolve
Hmm.
that by an opposed roll or something like that, or do something else that will make like wave this in because say, okay, the combat has lasted that long, and because if you're just waiting for a roll at 20, it's people are gonna just go on their phone, especially if there's other people on the table there.
Yeah. So
Oh, look,
yeah.
El was saying that about like critical hits and fumble because like rolling more than 20. Yes, that's what we just talked about. So I hope you're
Mhm.
satisfied, El.
Yeah, that's very true. I think Pathfinder introduces the concept of flat-footed AC. Well, I think 3.5 introduced that concept of flat-footed AC in various ways to get it, and touch AC as well. So yeah, that's an interesting thing because I'm trying to think of situations where I've run into that. But normally it's not a problem for the table; it's a problem for one specific player, because normally you'll have, maybe two people in your party in a game of Pathfinder that are actually trying to hit AC. And then you'll have a wizard that's casting spells that are targeting either touch AC, which is way lower because all they have to do is fire a beam that just can touch them and it's going to ignore all of their armor. So all they can do is dodge, or it's going to target their saves. And then you'll have, various other characters. Maybe you've got a monk that's going to target the combat maneuver defense, and their armor doesn't play into that. So, yeah, uh, I would maybe if you get into one of those slugfests, I would keep that in the fiction, and then next time maybe show like you could have like a two armored knights, fighting just off to the side, have a duel, and then just have a short little description of like, oh yeah, this guy's grappling this dude. He's shoving his visor up so he can get his dagger in there. So he's not having to go against 34 AC. He's having to go against 24 AC. Because if you grapple somebody in Pathfinder successfully, you just get an automatic hit against them. So which makes sense. I like that rule. Or if you trip somebody, it way lowers their AC. It drops it by 4, I think, against melee attacks. If your wizard or something manages to cast a spell and stun them, their AC goes way down and they drop their shield. So that's their.
So all those are way to
Mm,
mitigate the risk in the
mm,
VC. So
yeah.
think a little more tactical, so you don't have to rely on just pure luck.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about pure luck, also like that's
Mm-hmm.
something we briefly touch upon. Like, should those critical hit and critical miss just be based on luck? And we already mentioned that in Pathfinder, because you have to confirm, so your skill does have an impact if you actually, because if you don't confirm your crit, it's still gonna be hit.
Mm.
But now your skill does have an impact on how often you're gonna get a crit, and not only that, but also you can increase your crit range in different
Mm-hmm.
matters. Sometimes with weapons, sometimes with skill or feats. Um, in Dungeon and Dragon 5e, there's no such thing. So now the crit
Mm-hmm.
hits and crit miss are purely based on. I think there might be something that increase your crit range. Very few, but now it become like very based on luck, and except if you have like advantage, you have more chance to crit hit. If you have like, it become like I think like 7.5%, same for hit or miss. and
Mm-hmm.
and like Chris was saying here, the natural one fumble. If you have multiple attack, then it gives you
Oh,
more chance even to fumble.
yeah, that's actually a great example of why, like, just another reason, like, monks are almost never balanced in D20 systems. They have such an issue getting monks right in
Mhm.
D&D, where uh they're either punished for doing what their class is supposed to do, the flurry of blows, the like Wing Chun chain punches, uh, or they're just kind of boring unga bunga every single turn in combat. Oh, that's all I'm going to do because I get so many attacks. And so yeah, that's an interesting way that unevenly punishes someone who's supposed to be just as good skilled in combat as a fighter is.
Yeah. So, but in general, like, do you think it's better like if the, because I think I prefer if we were to use like crit hit and crit fumble, for me, like my preference would be that
Mm,
I want it to be linked to the character, because I want everything to be linked to the character. I want to the game aspect. I want them to have reason in the game world. Uh, Otherwise, it becomes too meta. It becomes too
mm.
gamey, just the game mechanics. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like the world implications of the way that Pathfinder First Edition does it. It is clunky, and I don't like I guess just like in general, the thing that I can say about Pathfinder First Edition is it's a system I love that I hate teaching new players because of all of the nonsense that you have to keep track of. But I do like the idea of if you go into the Assassin Prestige class, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be critting people all of the time because that's what they're doing, and it's not just luck; it's that they're explicitly like setting up and trying to target these weak spots in the person's armor or the vital points of this creature, or like the vivisectionist alchemist. They have this knowledge of anatomy that allows them to hit those weak points more often. And then with like certain weapons having higher crit range or higher crit damage, okay, that can get um a little annoying here and there because it's like, well, um if an axe is cutting your head off or a sword is cutting your head off, that's kind of the same thing at the end of the day. But I get that it adds variety in the way not just that characters choose to look, but they function as well.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also do like that you have the wizard backed into the corner, everybody else is unconscious. He knows he's not good at fighting, and he knows that probably if he doesn't try to stab this dude with his dagger, that's it. That's going to be everyone dead. And you can have those big Hail Mary moments where the wizard does roll a 20 on the dagger and then roll a confirm, and then oh yep, that was it. um so I kind
And
of
then
like
you,
that range of yeah, there are classes and equipment and stuff like that that can
yeah.
be specialized, but also there is that random chance. There is that the puncher's chance, as they say. I mean,
Do you
not to
think they
talk
do?
for ages.
Do you think they do it right with the those weapon with extended crit range? Shouldn't be like the dagger be the one with the
Mm,
bigger crit range, and the
I think
axe
it.
be the one,
I
like the
think
one
it
that the weapon that's more nimble and
Yeah, I think it generally gets things right. Pathfinder gets it's kind of weird. They get some stuff right, but there's some stuff that is still it's D&D. It's attached to Gygax's just wrong ideas of of what things are. So the dagger does have a bigger crit range, right? It's got a 19 to 20, but then you have the
hmm,
rapier, which has an 18 to 20, and I would say, uh, hmm, it's that's I suppose we should get into what is a crit, right? Because
yeah,
to me a rapier is it's a precision weapon, so it's got that sort of generally in Pathfinder, the more like precise thrusting oriented weapons have the bigger crit range, so they crit more often. And the big hacking, chopping, and like big
yeah.
heavy weapons have a higher crit multiplier.
But
Um,
you're into EMA, so
mm,
I'm sure you know that like from what I've been learned from history, stabbing weapon or tend to be more deadly, but doesn't are not fight ender. Slashing
mm,
weapon or fight ender, because
yeah,
people are gonna get stabbed, they're gonna die, but they can fight still for
yeah.
some time, quite a bit of time.
Yeah, there's an account of a rapier duel where the coroners there, the guy gets stabbed in the chest, wins the duel, and then drops dead like a minute later. And the coroners go and they're like, his heart was like completely cut in half. It was basically the best possible thrust you could have gotten, and
Yeah,
it wasn't enough to end the fight then and there.
yeah. Although like, and
Um,
somebody can get slashed pretty bad,
mm,
he will survive, but he's not gonna. The end is
yeah,
the fight is done there.
yeah,
So in that sense, does it make sense that those stabby weapon have the biggest range? Because
yeah.
oftentimes, like in role playing game, oftentimes we fight monster, which I think is a problem in itself. But
Mm,
we kill the monster. But
mm,
what we really want would be to end the fight. That's usually what people are after. If killing the bad guy and the fight, that's fine. But maybe HP should represent that a bit better. That could be a discussion for a different a different time.
Yeah.
But it is something that usually like bothering me. But then again, you also have like the dagger. It's probably like one of the weapons that killed the most people in the medieval time, especially in late medieval when you have a lot of armor and stuff like that.
Mm.
Because it was the armor, like if you take a rondel, it was the weapon made to defeat, like to bypass armor.
Yeah.
So,
And
but then again, this is in a specific context. If the guy is grapple, is like you wrestled him and stuff like that. Now you can stab him in the eye slit.
yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to say is it a crit if I've got you, held here and I know exactly where this is going to go? No, I would say a Pathfinder represents that as a coup de grace, which is if your opponent's helpless, if you've totally pinned them grappled and you just have this here, you automatically get your max damage on that. You can basically just kill them. And I think that's a pretty good way to represent that. So then what is a crit? Well, I guess the reason that they have higher crit range with the thrusting weapons, but not higher crit multipliers, is that if you thrust, you are more likely to you're more likely to penetrate and hit an organ and do a solid amount of damage, even if it doesn't end the fight immediately. Whereas with a slashing weapon, you aren't as likely to hit something that will guaranteed wound them, but when you do, it's going to be a much worse injury, a much more debilitating injury, because you'll cut through bone, you'll cut through tendons and the like. For example, just in general, the human body is made to deflect blunt and slashing blows, because that's what animals and just we as humans have crappy weapons without tools. But with a puncturing weapon, there's pretty much nothing in nature that has something like a screwdriver that just goes, like that. Animals
Mhm.
don't do that.
Yes,
So if
some have like a
you know,
stinger.
yeah, but usually like small animals, nothing
Yeah.
like super big. But if you take a dagger and jam it into somebody's temple, that's going to kill them. But there's a good chance that if you slash them with a sword, that could glance off of that. If they just turn a little bit at a bad angle, then yeah, that could happen very easily. But if you're a little lower and you slash at the neck versus stabbing at the neck, you can get stabbed in the neck and probably be okay, depending, because they'd have to get lucky and hit you know
Yep.
carotid or jugular. But if
I
you
wanted to highlight
slash, you're
I wanted to highlight this comment there because like say like dagger should be more deadly against grapple and prone enemies. And I know that some system, if an enemy is incapacitated, restrained, or in some like, then hitting them is gonna give you like an automatic crit. So this is also a way to get crits, also a way to mitigate. Like if you an enemy that you cannot hit, you have to rely on crit. Maybe then becomes the time to grapple him. Maybe one guy grappled and then the other guy come and stab it with his spear with his knife. Then you get this automatic crit, automatic hit, automatic crit, double damage, whatever the system does. So this is also an approach. Now we see the introduction not only of skill, not only of chance, but of tactics to get crits. I think that's a good addition. I think that's an important point. Maybe that should be done more. Maybe I think a system maybe like they don't do enough about that. What do you think?
I think in general, systems don't represent as well as they could using the right tool for the right job. Because I always make the example, right? You wouldn't use a hammer to drive in a screw. But in most RPGs, you can use a sword for literally the entire game for every single combat. You're trying to get
Mhm.
through the armored plate of a knight. You're trying to fight a zombie. You're trying to get through, the magically armored scales on a dragon. Yep, your sword's just as good at all of those things. And some systems have like damage resistance where it's like, oh, a skeleton you should use a blunt weapon for, and it's like, I don't really know why isn't that applied to everything, right? That's because the reality represents that swords were, as cool as they are, as much as I love swords, they weren't really the best job or the best tool for any job. They were kind of okay at all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they even mention in the historical sources, like they'll justify why they're using swords in the treatises, and it's like, well, because it's the right honorable weapon. It's what a knight should use. Of course, a knight is using a sword. It's as much a statement about the sort of character of the person or the character of the character in a tabletop RPG
Yeah.
to be using a sword as it is a
It-
weapon.
and we know
Um,
where that come from. You know that they were harder to make, more expensive to make, and they were also a good weapon to carry around, much easier to carry around than a spear or an axe, even, or
mm, mm.
so something
And
you can
to
bring.
they would mark you as a member of a class very often.
Mm.
Most cities had laws that were like, you can't carry anything that's bigger than a dagger to defend
Yeah.
yourself unless
Some
you are a member
so,
of a but,
yeah, that varies a lot from place to place and from time to time. Obviously, like when people like talk about medieval time, like, well, it's like what, like 30 countries on 1,000 year. So
yeah. People can't even agree on when the Renaissance starts and ends. So
yeah. Arman was saying, like, was talking about an horse rule. If you roll at 20, you can roll another d20, and if you roll 20 again, then it's an insta kill. So if you like do the double, and that's like a like would be like a fraction of a percent
yeah, like a
to happen.
0.5% chance,
Yeah,
something like
something like
that.
that. Yeah, 5%. Yeah, 0.25, point zero
Yeah,
25 or 0.2. Yeah,
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 something like that.
yeah, something. And I think that's an interesting thing because I want to talk about the consequence of a critical hit. Are
Mm.
they enough? Like now, like, and that's like, you could have the normal critical hit, but then if you double your critical hit, then it's the insta kill. And because we think about like, and somebody was saying that like, oh, you double 20 on a dragon. Yes, too cheesy. But then at the same time, if you look at in the Lord of the Ring with the bard with the single arrow that kills Smug, although it's a special arrow, I guess. But is there a place for, like, is doing double damage, triple damage enough? Does it need to be super lethal? Should it be like, yeah, you're just dead. You got your head chopped off, or cut in half completely in the throne.
Yeah, I think again it depends on like how gritty you wanted the setting, because earlier D&D was a lot grittier than D&D now, right?
Mhm.
It was about at third edition when it switched to being when it started to switch. It wasn't instant, but the like third edition started the switch to it being a more high fantasy game.
You get the chance
Um
there.
0.002 for Private Wolf.
Yeah.
Um See, that sort of rule I see is that seems kind of pointless, right? What I mean, at the same time, when it did happen, that would be like, that would be insane. And then you'd feel really bad when you wasted it on some dude that had like 3 health.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I think that works in a game that's grittier, and it would make a slight tangent here. The lethality of your game in proportion to how long it takes to make a character is a big thing here. And with each edition of Dungeons and Dragons, it has basically trended that it's taking you longer and longer to make a character because you have more choices to make.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't say you really want it to be more lethal there, because then if your players having to spend 30 minutes to an hour every single time and they're dying once a session, they end up spending, half as much time making characters as they do actually playing the
Yeah.
game. That can get frustrating. And in my experience, at least, this might not always be the case, but if people know they can just, random chance die at the drop of the hat, they start to not be in character because
What if,
they have no reason to be attached.
yeah. And also they want to save the skin of the character, like, so they're
Mm.
gonna meta game to.
Yeah, so they go, well, I had this, this, does that apply here? And they
What if critical hits were reserved to PCs and named NPCs. Would that kind of mitigate that issue? Now you can keep them very lethal. All the mook, the people are just that's just an orc. Doesn't have a name. He's nobody. He's just an undead. It's a skeleton. But like if it's a bad guy, it's a guy with a name. You know, somebody that you know. Maybe like bigger monster or dragons that should mean something. Then they have this possibility to crit. But other than that, would that make it possible to say like, you know what, let's make crits very meaningful then?
Yeah. Um, I think mm, you'd have to have a reason for it, right? Like that the player characters and these certain characters are like maybe they're favored by some deity. And that's maybe you
And
have like some,
it would be like certainly like a it would give like a more cinematic feel because you would
mhm,
expect like you don't expect that the hero of the movie to be killed by some random mook, but or
mhm,
to be even like seriously damaged by some random mook. But when it's a bad guy, now you get this tension. So it's the same thing with it's the same kind of a concept with the minions. So of course it breaks the verisimilitude in the sense that now like there's some character that are on a pedestal, but it allows to have those more intense moments when you fight somebody important.
mm. Yeah. I think and I think that's sort of fine. Because of course, I mean, you have Star Wars, where it's, I mean, it's uh, one of the things that people always make fun of, but still love that series. Is yeah, the stormtroopers never hit anything. They just miss all the
Mhm.
time. Um, and it doesn't make really any sense. And there's some in-world attempts to explain it, but it never really goes well. But so that's fine. I think 13th Age. It's not quite the same, but it has a rule where the player characters never fully miss. Anytime they attack, they always deal at least one damage.
Yep.
Um, and that
Is it
is an
13
example.
age?
I think so. Mm.
Oh yeah, I thought it was like I thought it was like fantasy age, but maybe I'm just which are unrelated. But like I thought it was like an age game, but like maybe it's 13 age.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm mistaken. Doesn't
It's
matter.
been a while since I've run that
Yeah,
system, so
yeah, yeah. I've looked into those two like kind of like in the same kind of time frame, so sometimes I confuse them.
mm,
Mm. You talk about Star Wars,
mm,
where the Stormtrooper always miss, although when the Death Star, like
yeah.
Leah said, they left us escape. So were they instructed to miss? Anyway, that's a
Mm,
different topic.
mm,
But let's talk about that, like the representation of critical hits and critical fumble in fiction, or non-fiction in that case. Like because El mentioned David and Goliath, where David like kill with one hit with the sling. And here El say it's too high fantasy for some. I would say that's much lower fantasy than taking like tons of arrow and surviving, or taking ton of slash and surviving. I guess that depends on the way that we see it,
mm.
because in real life, if you get hit by a sling in the head,
Yeah.
you might well die.
But of course, the French knights at Agincourt that did get shot by like hundreds of arrows, and they were fine because they were very shallow penetration. But yeah.
And also they had armor that
Mhm,
mitigate that. That's a topic for another day. AC versus damage reduction. Definitely need to touch that.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah. But so what are other chance? What are other example of critical hit, critical miss on in combat, in or in skill? Because we talked about it, and now we focus a lot on combat, but there's also like critical hit sometimes
Mhm.
also using skill, which which does that mean? Should like you perform outstanding or like outstandingly, or you perform as well as you could? But what are examples that would come to your mind into fiction that you would see some representation of that?
I think crit successes in skills are they're the thing that I think of more really in fiction because there's always the trope of like the idiot savant that some machine is malfunctioning and they just go and bang on it with a hammer and then all of a sudden it works. And that's sort of the example of like, you have nothing in a skill, but you're just rolling, your naked D20 or a single D6 or
Hmm.
whatever the resolution mechanic is, and then oh, there we go, nat 20, and then you manage to succeed to make this totally nonsensical, but I mean, sometimes even that happens in real life, though. Something's hey Charlotte, something's not working, and you have no idea why, and you're at odds end, and you just sort of bang on the top, and then some component rattles loose and just ends up where it's supposed to be, and that's that. I think of the anime Thunderbolt Gundam. I don't know if any of you
I'm not
have
familiar
seen
with
that.
it.
But they're in this like they're fighting over the ruins of this space colony, and it's called the Thunderbolt sector because like all of the electronics discharging has created like some weird instability, and there's just constant like lightning arcing through the area. And there's this moment where the protagonist pretty early on is just about to die. He's about to be killed, and then all of a sudden this lightning strikes in the middle and intercepts this guy's shot. uh and that's just total luck, right? It's entirely, it's to um some would call that plot armor, but
Mhm.
of course that's in the world, that's just the luck of the draw at that point. And yeah.
Yeah, I can think of like a. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dune,
Mm-hmm.
the novel, actually, because it's not very represented as well in the movie, the
It's been a while
80,
since I've read it, but
84 movie, the only one that matters. But when Jessica meet the Shoutout Mapes, and the Shoutout Mapes take out a Chris knife and ask if Jessica know what it is, and Jessica think about the the Missionera Protectiva. I forgot the name exactly. Like those ensignment, those teaching of the Bene Gesserit, where they went to seed some myth, and she come to give an answer, like say, oh, it's a maker of death. But as she say maker, she see the Shadow Mape react like, oh, and then she stop herself from going further. Like for me, that would be an example of like a crit hit. Like she probably like roll on her, like roll your knowledge of Bene Gesserit of Protectiva Missionara, and then she rolled in at 20. She would have like said something that wasn't good, but like now like the way that she used the word really resonated. She could catch that and stop there, and that create like this whole big thing there between them. I
mm-hmm.
think that would be an example of a crit hit on a, and like yeah, the David and Goliath would be a good example as well. And
um crit fail in Mad Max 2 when the guy is throwing the boomerang back at the feral child, comes back and kills his girlfriend. But
boyfriend,
again,
but yeah,
that would be something where you would need the grittiness of or the over the topness. Either way, you could see that both ways in Mad Max. So
yeah,
that
that's a
would,
good example. That's a good example. You mentioned like because you said oh roll a single d6 and stuff like that. That's something we can talk about, like because we
mm,
talked a lot about typical D&D, Pathfinder, stuff like that. Those
mm,
those D&D type game, D20 type game.
mm.
I think it's fair to talk about those a lot because that's what most people are familiar with. But what about in those D6 system, dice pool system? So oftentimes they don't have like a critical hit mechanic per se, but sometimes they include exploding dice mechanic. Would that make it a form of critical? Because also oftentimes those game, if you look for success or if you look for a number, if you roll twice over the target number, maybe you're gonna get something special. Should that be considered as critical as well? I guess even if it's not by the if they don't put the label on it, I guess it'd be fair to call those critical.
Yeah, I would say so because it's still a sort of luck based mechanic that gives you a benefit for being lucky it in the game mechanic outside of the world, and then you have to find the justification for that inside the world. So yeah, I would say those are, yeah.
If you were to when it's damaged that you have your dice explode, then you do have the possibility of like doing this one hit, especially if like it's a lower hit point kind of game. You do have like those possibility of doing those one hit kill. I guess that would make it take the place of of critical. Maybe that could even be something that could be included in D20 game on a critical hit. Then your damage die explode. Would that be sufficiently interesting, or is it not enough?
Yeah, I think it depends on which D20 system. Like in a, I like what it represents because, yeah, when you, it helps avoid those sort of, like we were talking earlier, the like 2 damage crits that are just like, well, what exactly was this crit then? If it only did, it didn't even do max possible normal damage. So it helps avoid those situations. And if you are down for those possibilities of the one hit kills, that's it adds that there. I think there's a danger of it becoming too much in some of the systems that do already double all of the bonuses to damage. So, like in Pathfinder in 3.5, you can rack up a ton of crit damage already without exploding dice. So, I would think that would be something that would need to be a standalone by itself.
Yeah, I want to let's take a look at what people have to say in chat a bit. Since we do this live, we need to pay attention to the audience.
Yeah.
Iron Man say we're not using the crit fumble at all. I don't either, because I think it becomes like too goofy. You would need to do something very bad for it to. And I prefer like if there's meaning. Do you, Tyler, use crit fumble?
I do, but I've just applied it's always bothered me that Pathfinder doesn't apply the same logic. I make you confirm the crit fumbles too.
Oh,
And
right.
you would only crit fumble if the one plus whatever you're trying to hit doesn't actually succeed at what you're trying to do.
So you would roll a 1.
Yeah.
It's a miss.
Yeah.
You roll again. If you miss again, then it's the fumble.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you roll again and do you hit, then you don't hit.
Then
but
it's
you
just a
don't just
normal failure. Yeah.
Yeah. How long do you? And you don't feel like that this slow down the game too much? I guess like they don't happen that often, but like now you have like 10% of the time you have to do confirmation. Is that like a?
Yeah. It's yeah, I mean, it's just it doesn't take that long once it's really just when you're starting to learn the game and I've added 2 new players to my Pathfinder group in like the past year or so, so it hasn't felt that bad. I think there's worse things in Pathfinder that slow down the game. To go on a tangent.
And you play in person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I find like sometimes like some player, take a long time to make every roll. They're gonna shake a lot, blow on the dice. I guess like at some point those become a bit annoying. David Guil say, I do have a critical table, but thinking of scrapping it in favor of class specific bonuses when you crit. That can be an interesting approach. I think your class mean like maybe the rogue is the one that on a crit is gonna do a shit ton of damage. Maybe the fighter is gonna disarm the opponent or stun them. Yeah, that could be a very interesting way to do it. Yeah. And you say like spellcaster don't have crit effects. I guess they could on spellcasting. Hello, Bear. Nice seeing you.
I was thinking also it could be like a really flavorful, like high risk, high reward if your caster does go into combat and like uses the enemy's blood as like a spell casting component or something. But
yeah. Charlotte asked, what would be the proper balance between depth and complexity? I think that's a very interesting question. That's definitely a topic we should talk someday. Do you want to mention like something quickly about it now? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. I think that's like one of the foundational questions of what is your go-to, like choosing your go-to system. So yeah, we'll definitely have to do a full thing on that. But I think that that's a tricky one, right? Because different people will have a different tolerance for how long turns take. Different people will have a different tolerance for vagueness in what the mechanic is
Yeah.
explaining, right? Because that's um, for me, I don't like a lot of vagueness in descriptions, and I don't like. I also have issues when the system displays a lack of understanding of how combat works because I mean, while not every RPG is combat based, I would say a good 60% of any tabletop RPG is combat
Probably
in
a higher.
general. Yeah, probably higher. But so it's uh, hmm, yeah, it's one of those things where that's a fine line for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's what David will say, and I agree with that. Like, that's gonna be to some extent like a lot of like personal preference. I think there's some
Hmm.
point where like it's always like does the complexity actually add something to the game? There's always this
Hmm.
question because sometimes a system can be complex for complexity's sake, and you can do like much better with something simpler or
Yeah,
have the same feeling. So there's that as
yeah.
well.
My
Uh,
my personal answer is I prefer more crunchy, complex systems because it's easier to remove things than it is to add things. Um,
yeah, depending on the system, some system are very like are very like a big bowl of spaghetti
yeah,
that you
yeah.
have
If you
one thing and
if you don't like the core mechanic, obviously that's an.
yeah.
If you don't like the D20, don't play a D20 system. Yeah.
Ironman
Oh,
say
Arn Master.
Iron Master as critical 20% of the time. It is percentile of multiple of 5. It's a crit, so however, it just means like a good success versus the enemy defense roll. It's just a little bit better. That's something that we can talk about as well. Like, is it better to have crits that are more rare but more impactful, or crits more often but are not as like impressive? Maybe a mix of both. Maybe you can have like different level of crit. What do you think in the game world? Because I like those crit being rare, but being like it, there's the object like the Vorpal sword. On a crit, you do an insta kill, and we talk about the insta kills like that. I think maybe 5% is too often, or although maybe not. Maybe fight. Maybe getting into fight is supposed to be deadly. What is your preference in that? Like, what do you feel like is and what makes the more sense in the game world?
I think the damage roll is what's supposed to be determining like the little increments, right? That's supposed to be you roll a d6 on your short sword to determine strength plus damage.
Hmm.
And the crit should be it should be a multiplier for that, right? Because if you're just if the to hit always has this little chance to be a little bit better, little chance to be a little bit worse, then that's kind of almost too granular, right? I can't remember what system I'm thinking of, but was it fourth edition that had glancing blow? No, I'm thinking of uh I thought of fourth edition because that's a mechanic in the Dungeons and Dragons MMO. They have the glancing blow, and that just gets too much. Where you have to look and you have to go, is that a crit? Is that a glancing blow? Is that a full
Yep.
miss? Is that a hit? And you're there. It might not be a lot of math, but it's just having to constantly keep all of that in your head.
Hmm.
You're thinking more about the mechanics than you are about what the mechanics mean, which is these people are in a fight, they're hitting or they're not hitting. And yeah, I think the difference between like 20% chance to crit is that would sort of imply, that an absolute beginner at boxing could land 20% of their punches on somebody like Floyd Mayweather, wouldn't it? And that's just not the case, right? That's
It depends how to do it. If your crit needs to like because you say like it's on every multiple of 5. So if you roll like it's a percentage type system.
mm,
If you roll 35, it's gonna be a crit because it's a multiple of 5. But I think it still need to be a hit first. You know what I mean? So
okay,
you need you
okay.
need to you need to hit, and then if you hit and you're on a multiple of 5, then you're gonna do a slightly more damage. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels to me like something that should just be the job of the damage dice of the weapon.
Hmm.
To add your randomization there. That feels like feels a bit like you're playing roulette, right? At that point, because I mean, we could get into the granularity of like, well, if I if I hit you in the neck, am I doing like a crushing trauma? Is it impacting your ability to breathe, or are you bleeding
Yeah,
out, or are you, can you speak? And yeah, these are things we can think about in real life, but I think that's things that are better determined by the GM just on the fly through
yeah.
narration than
That's something,
yeah.
because also like in a way, it's say like, well, it's every like 1 in 5 hits going to do slightly the more damage, but I guess that's also something that should be considered by the damage roll itself.
Mhm.
Some hit can do more damage just based on the
Mm.
damage roll. And you mentioned like those hit location. That's something I did a review of the Witcher RPG recently on my channel, and in this game you do have the critical hit. If you roll a 10 on you roll 1d10, so you have like 10% chance of having this critical hit, which makes the game pretty lethal, because also on critical hit you have you have to do hit location, and then you have uh critical hit chart for every hit location you can hit.
You've immediately reminded me of, so 20 years ago,
Hmm.
Kinzer and Co. made fun of this with Hackmaster Fourth Edition,
Yeah.
because they
Oh wait.
have three different D10,000 crit charts for slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's absolutely ridiculous. It's like, oh, you rolled a 9,247. You hit him for 4 times damage in his left pinky. And like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
Critical chart can become repetitious. Like we talk about that, and I think we both agree on that at some point. Like
Mm.
they once you went through them a few times, it's just like yeah. Um, and
And
Shauna, say the GM, like you were saying, Tyler here. Can you imagine you crit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just what I was about to say. And to the players can influence that by, if they're, if they're role playing their combat, instead of just I swing my sword at him, I swing my sword and I'm aiming at his neck. Then if they roll a crit, you as the GM shouldn't roll on the table and go, well, you hit him in the pinky. That makes less sense. Maybe them getting the crit is like, oh yeah, well, not only were you aiming at their neck, you hit them in the neck. So, or something like that. I also like to do, if a crit knocks somebody unconscious but doesn't kill them, I like to do like lasting injuries, like, because I don't think that's represented very well in a lot of games, but we do see that in, of course, real life, but also fiction.
Yeah.
Going back to Star Wars, when Luke Skywalker loses his hand, but in most D20 systems, especially, it's just kind of either you're alive or you're dead.
Hmm. Yeah, but then again, like if we were like in a hit point system, this fight with Luke Skywalker could be seen as Luke ran out of hit point. That doesn't necessarily mean dead. It means
Mhm.
he lost the fight, and now instead of being killed, he got like this permanent injury and stuff like that. Those are also something that you can mitigate, and that it's not
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean a random chance. The fight
Mhm.
came to a dramatic end.
Mhm.
Our men say, I'm not sure if AC or DR, damage resistance, best for armor. Definitely a topic we're gonna need to talk about someday. Yeah.
But Paizo didn't even know they include armor as DR as an optional rule in first
Mhm.
edition, because they're like, there's issues and benefits with both, so do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. In Winter Dawn I do damage reduction, so maybe I'm biased toward that. But like like we made a video recently about that. Yeah, usually if you in full plate armor and you get hit on the armor, it's gonna do no damage, gonna pass. But if you do the damage reduction right, that can also be true.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Hell, say people need to stop simulating movie and stories with game. Well, I don't know. We depends. Like, I'm not trying. I'm trying to simulate a world, but a lot of movie try to do that as well. So are we trying
Yeah, um, movies and stories are helpful to build a framework for discussion around, though, right? Because otherwise, we're just going to kind of be talking circles in a vacuum, where it can be tricky to talk about things without comparing them to other things. So, obviously role playing games aren't movies, and they don't become stories until you've already done it, posthumously.
Yeah.
But it's helpful to have these ideas to think about, right? Because I would argue that somebody probably couldn't be a very good GM if they had never seen a movie or read a book, because you would then only ever be describing things that you know about. You're gonna take inspiration from scenes that you see in movies, and yeah, you're describing them on the fly. They're not pre-written, but they're the things that are coming to mind are from pre-written media. Just
Mhm.
that's sort of unavoidable.
Crowdfunding combat is exhausting, and there should be an endurance mechanic if you're doing protected. I do have that in the Winter Down, so you can check that
The
out.
main mechanic in my game is stamina.
Yeah, well, mine I call it spirit because it's a mix between stamina and moral. Because
Morale, yeah.
I find those things like in the end work mechanically the same. If you're like demoralized or if you're exhausted, it's gonna impact you in the same way. Something we can do a
Mhm.
little more, talk a little more another day as well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, no, I've taught plenty of. Uh, you have the most annoying martial arts student is the one that's critiquing the technique before they've even they've basically gone like, oh, that technique's never gonna work, and they've admitted defeat before they've even tried, and it's like, well, it doesn't matter
yeah.
how physically skilled you are if you won't even try it.
Just and say I could see integrating some sort of system that the longer two opponents were fighting, there's some system that modifier will apply. There's some
Mm.
system that do like every round, like
Yeah,
basically you add to every chance to it
yeah.
the number of
13th
round that
age.
you've been in the
Yep.
fight. Yeah, is that
Yeah,
13 age
13th
that
age
does it?
does
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so at some point, even if at some point like there's gonna be you're gonna don't hit that much because they see it's too high, then at some point you're gonna add like a +6, +7, +8, whatever to your fight. So the it's gonna be much more common. I think that's good
I think
mechanic.
yeah, I think 13th age does it pretty elegantly because it's a d6. It starts at 1 and it just goes
Mhm.
up to a maximum of 6, and it goes up
Yeah,
every round.
I would let go. I would let go more than that. Like, I
Mm,
wouldn't put a maximum on how high it can go, because the point of the mechanic also is to have the fight end at some point, not have the
mhm,
fight drag on
mhm.
all the time. And if you have an enemy that hit hard, you want to fight if you want to finish the fight as fast as possible. Yeah. I'm quite behind on the chat, and we're coming
I
close to an
haven't
end.
been paying attention at all.
Yeah, I noticed that you haven't been paying attention, but hey guys, that's the first episode where me and Tyler is gonna learn to work together a little bit better and stuff like that. We're not gonna keep
Yeah.
plays. Like you have to give us a chance. Uh, David Gual, I have a comment directly for you. I can show you the monk I designed for my D&D ish game. I think you'll dig it.
Oh,
I don't know if
please
you're
do.
familiar with Dungeon Delver.
I've seen it. I haven't had a chance to look at the system though.
Yeah, you might be like I find I hope like David was not gonna be insulted by that, but I find like there's a bit of a mix between like 3.5 and 5e. It kind of
Hmm.
like bridge the gap a bit. There's the advantage mechanic. I think they do it a little bit better than 5e actually, but there's also a lot of like a 3.5 DNA. So I think I think there's a lot of like, interesting thing that he
Yeah,
did with it.
definitely worth checking out. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, let's see if is there anything that you want to talk about that we didn't cover about critical hit? I know like there's oh yeah, there's one thing I wanted to talk about. Build for like crit chaser build.
Mm.
Games that I like, I hate it. but but I don't like character build. I like a character to evolve based on what happened in the game. So it kind of annoy me, but you play Pathfinder, so this is bound to happen. People are gonna make those character build. That's part of the reason why like I'm not a big fan of the system. Like although you can play the system without doing that if you have the right group, but
Yeah. I yeah, just I always see that one of the biggest criticisms of Pathfinder is, oh, you have to min max, or you're just going to fall behind the other members of the party. And I'm like, well, no, you just find a group that has agreed that you're not going to min max. Easier said than done, sure, but um, I like it because it represents things we have in real life. Like there are very often, especially in unarmed striking, you have people that are headhunters. and that is they will ruthlessly, aggressively target your head. Are they going to be hitting you all the time? No, because you sort of know where to defend, but when they do hit you, they're hitting you in the head. Or people like Yoad Mahmoudi. He is a K1 kickboxer, and he's intentionally built his style around setting up lead leg roundhouse kicks to the head, and he just knocks
Mhm.
people out with one hit, all very consistently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
That's
narratively it can be
mm,
interesting to have those characters that's what they do. They're like the one hit guy.
mm,
Like
mm,
you say, we've seen that in MMA, we've seen that like in a
mm,
and even if you read like a story of like Musashi duel and
mm,
stuff like that,
mm,
they were over pretty fast.
or of course,
Uh
any sort of assassin type that doesn't
yep.
really want to get into a fight, they would prefer to kill the person with one hit before they even know they're there. I think crits are great at representing that sort of thing as well. Um, or someone that is just very skilled at armored combat and has very good accuracy with a dagger or a haft sword, and is very good at hunting those weak spots in the armor, or somebody who has a lot of knowledge about different monsters and the like, and knows about strange anatomy, and can knows that this hydra has four hearts and knows where to hit to get all of them with a spear. So I like that it can represent that about the character. I do agree, though, if you have a bad group, it gets annoying where it's just like, oh, I want to crit a lot. That's my character. He crits a lot, and he uses a rapier because a rapier crits on an 18. So I thought that'd be good.
Mhm.
I rolled a hit. Yeah, it can lead to that you don't if you don't vet your players correctly.
Yeah. David Gwalls talk about like I'm considering giving most thing DR against specific weapon type. That's also something like I do in Winter Down. Like armor is divided in armor type. Much work for not enough payoff, but could make weapon more interesting. That's also something that we can discuss sometime
Yeah.
because like giving a reason for people to use different type of weapon and
Well, yeah,
consider
I mean
them.
the short answer is knights carried no less than three, usually four weapons, and that
Yeah,
wasn't just for they weren't weighing themselves
and
down with all that just for show.
you had weapon that were somewhat versatile, like quite like a poleaxe. You had the
Mm-hmm.
blade, you had the hammer, you had
Mm-hmm.
the spike, so could face different situation. Yeah. Insert name here on the top of crits. With me, it's double damage. The total damage is 30% or more of the target HP. The strike is treated as it's a vorpal weapon. A blunt weapon incapacitate the stricken area.
Pathfinder has that as a massive damage, but it's 50% of total HP, and it doesn't have to be a crit; it's just anything.
So if you do 50% of a damage, and that's all. That's if you do that, it's almost like a crit on the damage roll, not only a crit on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's interesting as well. So if your damage is in certain names, 30%, which is a much lower threshold,
Mm-hmm.
which depend on the kind of system you play, like depending on how much HP the creature has, that might be meaningful or not. But 50% in a Pathfinder, that's another form of crit, you can say. Like you roll like the creature got 25 HP, you manage to do 13 in one hit. That's it, he's dead. I think that's an
I think
interesting.
they get a fortitude save to because it's basically like are they dying of shock or like instant blood loss or something like that. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Guardian of the Rune says system that are more mitigate damage bypassing that dagger bypassing would do more damage than a sword. That's what I do in the Winter Dawn as well. Like if you have like a dagger and enemies grapple, you can grapple him yourself and hit him with dagger, then you don't count armor.
What about an oak shot type 14 with the reinforced tip for penetration?
Well, you can do a half swording and have the same. You can do half
Yeah.
swording and have the same kind of effect as well. I
No,
do have
I'm
some
just
damage.
saying, we should have like an insane,
Yeah,
you don't just have
every
swords,
weapon, like yeah,
you have
every
every,
auction. Yeah, and there's one for axes, and then the ones for like a what is it, Wesley for the falchion for the single edge.
Oh,
Yeah. The thing about crit is always feel like something should happen, but it's a success or a fumble. You don't roll them all the time, so they're relatively rare. again, that depends on the system
Yeah.
as well. Like if they're only based on the D20 and it's the 1 and the 20 that is a crit, fumble, or it, now you start laying like 1 in 10. And that's also something that we can talk about. Like, there's people that want to roll a lot.
Mm.
Does critical fumble, the chance of having critical fumble, that is quite punishing. Is that a way to prevent people from always wanting to roll?
I think it is because going back to Shadowrun, if you only have like a one in a die pool at something, you're
Mm-hmm.
equally as likely to get a hit as you are to get a critical glitch. It's
Not
it's
not quite, no,
um
because yeah, it's 5-6, so you have like 1 in
well
3
five
chance
six
of a
one,
hit.
but you know
Yeah,
you're only
but
you're very very likely
very likely, yeah, 1
yeah
in 6, yeah.
so it encourages you to not that's a sort of system that is it's got more of that you get those scenes where the decker working on his computer is like, don't touch that, you can break something over here,
Mm-hmm.
um because they're likely to do that, and that sort of represents that, like, most of what the characters are doing in Shadowrun is very highly technical specialist work that, yeah, a layman is going to totally screw something up. But in a more, Renaissance medieval style of tech level, that's stuff that, people are working with their hands, anyone, pretty much everyone can climb, everyone has basic athletic skills. Even if they're not trained in it, they can at least attempt it, and it probably shouldn't end disastrously for them.
Mm-hmm. And should we have like a increasing fumble range? Maybe something linked to, I don't know, maybe if your HP are low, maybe then you're not gonna fumble only on a
Mm-hmm.
one, but on a one or two. If your HP are below 50% or below 25%, or you're gonna fumble on 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Could that be a way to make HP, because we know that in D&D you're 100% fresh until you get 0 HP. Could that be a
Yeah,
way to
it's
introduce a little more of an edge there? Like, oh, you're getting damaged, you're getting tired, you're getting beat up.
mm,
Or it could be linked
yeah.
to something else. It could, I don't know, level of exhaustion if you play 5e. Or could that be
Hmm.
something that, because that's something that we see sometimes, like critical hit range being increased. Critical fumble, it's pretty rare. Could that
Yeah,
be a
that's
way
true.
to both put consequence to your wound, to your injury, and also maybe you want to take a break, maybe you don't want to roll? With modern player, would it push them to do this one encounter a day type of adventuring even more? Because that there's also like this double edge there as well, because we know like player are tend to be frisky, to say the least. Modern player.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm?
Yeah, I definitely do like systems that give penalties for being at lower health or just exhaustion as well. But I'm trying to think of a system that even comes close to that, because yeah, you're right. That isn't something that's represented, but it's um it's totally true. As you're taking damage and as you're getting more and more tired, you are more likely to you're more likely to just make stupid mistakes, right? In MMA, you have the panic wrestling. Conor McGregor was
Yep.
infamous for that because he had shit cardio, and anytime someone made a fight, last the full 5 rounds, he would start panic wrestling, and he's not a wrestler at all. And
Hmm.
that would, to me, be an example of a crit fail. Is you go to throw an overhand right and just sort of slump over on top of the dude. So
Hmm.
maybe.
Yeah. Rex still say, I was checking OSC, and SimBX only mentioned natural 20. That is automatically it. No mention of critical hit so far. That is,
Mhm.
from what I recall, that is also true in older edition of D&D. You would hit
Mhm.
in combat on a 20, but it was just a hit. It didn't mean anything more. So there's that. Another thing that I want to talk about, like now we're almost like we're basically out of time, but we can, and Black Lodge Games are gonna start their stream with Crispy as well soon. But it's another other thing I want to touch about: system with wild dice, stun dice. Especially like you see that with like those dice pool system when one dies, one die is a different color, and rolling a 6 maybe on that die, like depending on the system, allow you to do something maybe akin to a critical hit. What do you think about those system? No, maybe impose some kind of extra damage or sometimes some condition, because that's also another thing that we haven't talked much about. Like, what about critical hit that do more than just, well, you do more damage? What about, like, well, now you do your damage, but you can also do one of those other effects from a list that you can choose, and maybe that can be linked to the class, like David was mentioning earlier. What do you have any thought on that?
Mm, yeah, I like that. I like that idea of adding more than just more damage to a crit. I think that can be interesting. Of course, it's if the crit just ends up killing them outright, then it's just a layer of complexity that doesn't matter. But yeah, that can definitely be interesting rather than just you deal more damage, you deal more damage, and it can take the weight off of the GM to come up with something interesting on the fly and have the system be
Yeah.
doing some of that creative work. Um, as far as the die thing, I haven't played any of those systems, but that's a rule I kind of hate, just because it feels so gamey. What is this random like single die in my pool representing here? But like when I'm rolling just a bunch of the same die, or 1d20 or percentile or something like that, it's like okay, that's random chance. But one out of these randomizers is like representing a different form of random chance. I
Hmm.
can't quantify it, but it's just something in my brain that just is like this is weird. I don't like it. I don't like don't double dip into my randomization, please.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but oftentimes those games also, you're gonna roll like one die, even if you have no skill or anything. Like, you're always gonna have like a minimum of one die to roll, and this is gonna
Hmm.
be the wild die. So I guess like this die represent, like, we know there's always like a random chance that something is gonna happen.
Yeah, I was
And
thinking
then
more
and then and then if you get more skill and stuff like that, it's gonna make you more consistent, but it's not gonna make those wild happenstance more likely. So I'm not too bothered by it. I'm more bothered when it's thing that, like, let's say, oh, if you roll a 6 on your wild eye, you can do a disarm, because that should be linked to your skill.
yeah, exactly. I because I was
Game
thinking
or skill should make it more likely that you can do those
the
kind of things. So it
mm,
depends how it's done. Like, if it's more like, oh, you're gonna
mhm,
do more damage, or if it's something random that will happen, then yeah, it doesn't bother me that it's only on
mhm,
one
mhm.
one predetermined die. But other than that, there's some game also that do. I forgot which game was. It was like a pool of d6 that you roll, and if you did double, you could activate something special, and if you
Oh no. Oh, it's been so good this stream. I've been surprised. Oh my god, we are so far behind on chat. Um oh wow. Wow, wow, wow.
sorry, I lost my signal. Yeah,
Yeah, you're fine.
I cut, like I said, like there was, I don't know where I cut, like there was the system of with a dice pool of d6s,
Mm,
and if you roll like double on some of the dice, like, or triple, like if you were like a number of the dice with the same number, you could activate some effect based on that. I forgot which system it was. Or was it?
mm,
I forgot. Maybe somebody in chat will know, but
yeah. I generally prefer things like that to be the intention of the character, though, because it's like
yeah.
you don't really swing a sword at somebody and then randomly they get tripped. Your intention is to try to trip them, and then either you succeed at that or you don't, and then maybe
But
if you
can
get
can you see that it's like you see an opportunity,
mm,
and yeah, it can seem
yeah,
random, but maybe in the way that you have to think about it is like you're fighting, you're exchanging blow and stuff like that,
mm,
and then during this exchange there's an opportunity that open that you can trip the guy, or you can disarm him, or you can like stun him, or whatever it
mm,
is.
Yeah,
Maybe it can be depicted as an opening. Maybe that's the way we should.
Maybe your strike stuns them and like they stumble back a bit, and then you see your opening to go for your
Yeah,
second thing.
yeah, because there's always a fair bit of chaos in a fight.
Yeah, there
Charlotte
is.
was
Yeah.
saying unknown army had an interesting way of ending crit. It was a DO 100 game, and if you roll double one or double two and succeed, good thing happen. If you roll double and fail, bad thing happen. I think isn't like a Call of Duty do that as well? Like
I think so.
the
They're
yeah,
very similar in flavor. I
yeah.
know.
I think like Call of Duty have the same mechanic if I remember correctly.
I think
But
so.
yeah, D 100 and double is gonna be a crit. It if you succeed, fail if you don't. So I think that's an
Mm,
interesting way to do it.
uh, a really interesting one. That the godlike what is it called? The one roll engine was the engine that got made off of that. Uh, Came out
Mm.
early 2000s. I want to say it was superheroes in World War II. Uh, Anytime you roll, it's D10 dice pool. Anytime you roll pairs or more of tens, you get an XP. Or no, you reduce a point of not burn, but whatever you gain a willpower back, which is the point you have to spend um to use your superpower. Uh, so it's sort of representing like not only do you succeed because of course in that system you want to roll high, you want to roll 10, so you do the best you possibly could, and also it's sort of like almost inspiring you, like you gain a bit of your will to keep fighting back after you've done that. Sorry, I stumbled through my my recollection of that system.
No, it's okay. Uh, I think I'm pretty much catch up on the chat. I sorry I didn't put everything on the
Mhm.
screen there. I tried to highlight like the relevant comment and stuff like that. Some people talk also about like crit on spell. I think
Uh-huh.
you know what? Let's talk about a bit about that. When it comes to magic, and everybody knows I'm the guy that got like something against magic. I hate magic. But when it comes to magic, this is a place where I like those big swingy crit. I want the chaos. I want like thing unexpected to happen because
Mhm.
I want and sometimes good or bad. You throw a fireball. Of course, in system like D&D and stuff like that, you don't roll for this kind of spell, but I like when you do. And then like there's a crit. Oh, it's gonna do much more damage. It could do too much damage. It could be too big, and then now you suddenly like now those things should be hard to control. So I think that could be interesting. Something that would be a crit hit. Now, the effect is gonna be much bigger, but now maybe you get roasted a bit too. Maybe you get hit. Like
Mm,
I think magic should have this unpredictable element to it.
mm. That's one of the things I
And,
love
and,
about
and
oh, I've killed him so that I can talk about what I want to say. I think that's one of the things I love about sorcerers in Vancian casting over wizards. Although I do also like wizards, but I love that sort of instinctual, wild magic that is just like the very often unhinged character that is just like, look, I can shoot fire out of my fingers. I don't know where it's gonna go, how far it's gonna go, but do you have a better idea? I like that the sort of characters that develop from the type of person that is willing to use, the force that, you know, think about, if you were in a, if you're in a modern day war, what kind of soldier would you have for them to be told, well, here's 20 grenades. Some of them have a radius of 50 meters. Some of them have a radius of 1 meter. And the guy that's going to go, oh yeah, I'm going to start chucking those. That's an interesting person.
yeah, yeah. Like I think wizard should always like be a little bit touched in the air. You're playing with force that you don't really understand. I think that's the way. Like I don't like when magic just become like science and stuff like that.
Mm.
I want magic to have like this fair bit of chaos, and
I,
it's
I like
again that's the
magic to
thing.
be like nuclear science, where it's something that they're on like the cusp of understanding, but they're
Yeah.
still, they're still playing with really dangerous experiments to find it.
Mhm.
It feels like every bit you learn about it, you have to risk like some horrific thing.
Yeah. Approximative knowledge.
Hmm tacit knowledge, the idea that, you're kind of bending the way that physics are supposed
Yeah.
to work, and is some outer creature you don't know about going to come to collect with that's something I
And
like about like Doctor Strange, one of my
I
favorite
think
Marvel characters. I know you don't like superheroes either, but that idea that he's got all of this magic power, but every time he uses something, that
I'm
there's a
a
cost to that.
I'm a very grumpy old man. I don't like wizard. I don't like superhero. I don't like. I just like guy that big muscle guy that punch each other in the face. No, but I think it's unfortunate though in system that like don't make you roll for magic because you do lose that. You know what I mean? Just like it makes
Hmm.
magic the more reliable and more like more thing that is like predictable in a way. You
Hmm.
cast the spell, you have this known effect. You know, it's the opposite of
I
how
mm,
magic should work.
that's something I like about Dungeon Crawl Classics and
Yep.
Weird Frontiers specifically, that they all have the not only do you not really know what spells you get to start with, you also
That's true. I don't like trains either.
you also don't uh at least in Weird Frontiers, they all have every spell has like its own unique like taint to it that
Mhm.
when you cast the spell for the first time, it does something unique for you that only that does. Um,
Or is it always going to be do this thing for you every time you cast a spell? Oh, that's interesting.
mhm,
That's pretty cool.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We should dive deep into magic at some point too, and the way to
Mhm.
represent it in fiction and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think we probably should wrap this one up. What do you think?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we. I was aiming for an hour and a half. I'm sorry we stepped a bit on a Black Lodge game.
Mm,
Uh, you guys that are. Thank you for people that join in chat, and thank you for people that watch later
yeah.
on. Now, like people, you should go watch their stream. They always have a good show, and now they have
Mm.
like a crispy on the show. So it's gonna be from the
Yeah, that's
channel
awesome. I didn't know
Runner.
about that.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one. That's what I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna go switch there. Any final thought? Any final word that you want to add, Tyler?
Um, yeah, probably a million. I mean, every RPG topic, it seems like you could talk, 5 hours longer than you think you could on. I'll try to do better at at reading the chat because I forgot they don't show up in the if you have it clicked on private chat the entire time,
Yeah, no,
which I did for about the first hour of the stream.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for joining me, Tyler. And like again, thank you for the people that watch, both live and both on the replay. And join us next week. We're gonna do that again,
Hmm?
same time, same day. So Thursday at 2000 EDT, which is 8 p.m. Eastern time for American, or that would be 7 Central, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Because you're in Central time.
Mhm.
And next week we're gonna talk about game prep. I assume, unless there's something that changed, but it should be about game prep. So join us then. I'm happy with all this first episode went.
Mhm.
Uh, can only go up from there. I guess we're gonna
Yeah.
find our stride and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna end the stream now, and I'm probably gonna be on tomorrow on the show formerly known as Friday Night Chill Stream. So maybe you can catch me there as well. And me and Tyler were on a conversation on the channel talking about game with Abraham and Rick from 28mm RPG about character progression and character development. Very very good talk. You
Mhm.
guys should look it up as well. Uh, Maybe I'll pin a link in the comment. Just look it up. You should
Yeah.
be subscribed to talking about game.
Mhm.
He has good content. All right,
It
take
does.
care, guys. Have a good
See
day.
ya.
Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Cats in the end.